Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of History Behind the Page, the live series where you get to know more about the people behind your favorite history pages and all things history. Tonight's guest, I am super excited to have him back on. We have Mr. Henry Sledge on tonight. Very excited. It's been a while since we've chatted, so I'm excited to catch up and just chat. So this is a live Q&A too as well, so you are more than welcome to ask questions. I do ask that if you want a question, on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there is a question mark bubble. Please submit your questions there as they get lost in the comments, and we want to make sure that we can get to all the questions that you have. So let's get Henry on, and we'll get this show.
Right. All right. Hey! Good, how are
Hey, how are
you?
you?
I can hear you.
Good,
I can hear you
good. Can
good.
you hear me
So,
okay?
how are you? How is everything?
It's good.
Yeah.
It's starting to warm
Uh,
up here in the deep south, so it's okay. Just doing the usual stuff,
yeah.
Sarah. You see the stuff I post on. I post history stuff, but I post stuff with when my son has a
Yeah.
mountain bike race or something like that. So
It's really
you know, but yeah, things are rolling
I
along. How about
am
you? Are
glad
you
to be
glad to
back
be
home.
back
Yes.
home?
I was just in Texas. Um, yeah, been
Yeah.
traveling a lot lately. Yeah, I was just realizing it's been since we've actually like
Mhm.
chatted. It's been 6 months since we've actually like chatted besides like messenger message. It's been 6 months since the symposium. It's been 6 months.
Has it been
Yeah.
that long? I I actually Jeremy
hmm
and I had a conversation yesterday. Uh, Um, I'm really wanting to well, we talked about a couple of things, some of which you and I can well, we
hmm
can go into all of it, Sarah. I mean, you can, you know, you're a friend of the family. You can talk to me about anything you want. But I had a really specific thing I wanted to go through with him, but we kind of broadened out after that. I'm really wanting to
Yeah.
get my dad's artifacts uh,
hmm
in place over
No,
there.
I think that. Go ahead.
And while
No, go
I'm
ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to walk over here and
No,
get
I
something.
totally
But
forgot what
go
I was
ahead.
gonna say. It went through one ear and out the other. So okay, so let's see. So the artifacts. You're wanting to get those to the World War II
Yeah,
museum? Mm-hmm.
I'd like to. I'd like to. I mean, you
Yeah.
see some of them behind me here. That's a fraction of the stuff of his that I
Mm-hmm.
have, and I've posted pictures, online of that stuff. Some of his things are at Auburn University in the archives there. They don't display them, but that's where Dad sent everything in 2000 when he gave up possession of all of it. And then after I got back from Peleliu, I began to slowly retrieve some
Yeah.
of those
Yeah.
things, for myself. Um, and I have them here, but I really they still have a lot of things at Auburn, and then there are some things displayed at the National Museum of the Pacific
Mm-hmm.
War in
That's
Fredericksburg, Texas.
so so
Um,
your dad gave stuff to Auburn University and then you retrieving them back? Oh, okay, so
I
you can
retrieved a
do
lot of
that.
the things.
It's not
Yeah,
property
because
of the university.
you can do that. I mean, what they do is permanently
Oh,
loan it back
okay.
to me, and it's it's complicated. I mean, you they permanently loan it back to me until the time of my death.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm going to do, Sarah, is if we can get this going
Mm-hmm.
over in New Orleans, I have a really good relationship with the people at Auburn, at the archivist there. and it's not the same guy who was in place when my dad sent everything there, but I will go to him and and, and just say, look, can we would you guys give up possession of his artifacts so that the National Museum of or the National
Yeah.
World War II Museum could display them? And that's going to be a process, and I don't know how that's going to go. I mean, they told me years ago. They said, "Look, we are set up to curate and maintain
Mhm.
documentation. You these things of your dad's, like, this kind of stuff here. We're not set up to curate and." He said, we can do it. We're happy to give these things a home, but we're really all about documentation. So I don't know. Now that was the gentleman who was in charge of the special
Mhm.
collections back then. It's somebody else now. But Greg Schmidt is the guy now, and I have a great relationship with Greg. He made it possible for me to get my hands on, I don't know if you can
Yeah.
see it. See these 3 books right here? That is and I mean, I'm just totally, I don't know how exciting
It's
this
very
is.
exciting.
Probably not very. And then
Uh-huh.
this is the 4th one right here. That is, I mean, if you want to know what the original manuscript of With the Old Breed,
Uh
can you
oh
see
yeah.
that?
Uh-huh.
Those 4 books. Um, Now, obviously, he hand wrote it. My mom typed it, but they had to assemble the
Mhm.
original manuscript, send it to me on a thumb drive back in October of 21 when I
Mhm.
embarked on this book project, that I've talked about some. And so I took that thumb drive and had it printed out and put in those coil bound books, okay, because I needed something really user
Mhm.
friendly that I could go through and highlight all the unpublished stuff. And so that's my working copy of that. That's going down another, as Paul
Yeah.
Woodadge would say, we're going
Oh,
down a
Paul.
rabbit hole. But you know, the artifacts, I really want to get them at Auburn. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Have
really want to
you
get them
been
to
in
New
contact with
Orleans.
the museum at all or anything?
Well, yeah, that's what I was
Mhm.
saying. Jeremy and I talked this morning. Um, he's, man, Jeremy is my buddy. I love Jeremy. And he's just a wonderful guy.
Mhm.
His dad passed away not too long ago, which, of course, my
Yeah.
mom passed away even more recently. So he and I have had some commiserating to do about that. But um, when we were there in New Orleans in
Mhm.
August for the Band of Brothers Symposium, that's when I first said, Jeremy, I want to get
Mhm.
my dad's things here where people can see them. And we sat down there in the hotel bar and had a few beers and had a long conversation about it. And he said, Henry, I really want to do that. Okay. But,
Yeah.
it's not his call. He's not the curator, you know? So, but we had a good conversation, and he said, I'll advance it to the next step. We kind of revisited that because when we got close to November and I was going over for the
Mhm.
panel, with
Yeah.
Rich and Saul, that just took center stage. Because I had to prepare to write, a presentation for that and then practice the hell out of it so I didn't sound ridiculous when I did it. So that took center stage, but we revisited the whole artifact thing
Mhm.
this morning, and
Yeah.
we'll see where it goes.
Well, it sounds good. That would be super cool, and I'm sure they would be excited to have your dad's stuff there. I mean,
I just want his things to
yeah,
be where people
exactly.
can see them.
And be cared for and
I'll tell you what. Yeah, here my dream, like, and I hit him with this. He thought it was a great idea, but so when we were
Mhm.
there in November, okay, our last day of the conference, Richard Frank took Saul and myself and my wife and my son through the
Mhm.
Pacific Gallery on a personal tour, which was huge. I mean, Rich is somebody I respect eminently.
Oh.
Um, he designed that gallery, and it was really cool for him to say, "Hey, I want to take you and your family
Mhm.
through myself." And so we did that. And at the end of it, he and I had a really good conversation. And you know how it is, Sarah, on the last day of a big trip like
Yeah.
that, everybody's going their
Mm-hmm.
separate ways and getting ready to go to the airport and all that kind of thing. But I mentioned to him about wanting to get my dad's things there, and I made a suggestion to him. I said, if you, and I don't know how long it's been since you read my dad's book, but the bunker, the fight they had
Yeah.
at the bunker on Ingusivus. I mean, they showed it in
Mm-hmm.
part seven I think it was part seven of the Pacific. They changed it up a little bit, but that episode, um, I said, man, what if you guys had a replication of that bunker and had
Mm-hmm.
mannequins kitted out in correct Marine Corps attire, and have that as like an example of a
Yeah.
small unit action on an island in the Pacific, and then augment that with the
Mm-hmm.
artifacts of Sledgehammer, you know. And he said, that's a great idea, I mean, but
Yeah.
who knows if that could ever happen. Good God, you got a lot of people joining this thing. I mean, you got a lot of
They're here
fans.
for they're here for you. They're
I'm
not
just
here
like
for
names are
me.
just the names are just reeling in. I'm
Yeah,
going,
they're here for you.
God
They're not here for
Almighty.
me.
Oh yeah, they are. They're here for you.
Great. Really quickly, I wanted to switch topics really quick, but I wanted to bring up this
Sure.
World War II. Your article.
Yeah.
Your
Yes.
article.
Yes.
If you guys
Oh yeah.
don't know, Henry was published in World War II magazine. That was back in August. Yeah, like
August. Yeah.
Yeah.
Autumn issue. So
But
August.
it just so cool. Have you thought about doing any other writings or publications?
Absolutely. I would love to. Here's the thing. I would really like to do that. The way that gig happened was I reached out to Karen Jensen,
Mm-hmm.
who was editor at that time of World War II magazine, um, and I I well,
Mm-hmm.
I had already written the article, and I'd kind of run it by John McManus, and he put his
John McManus.
imprimatur on it, so to speak,
That's
and
so cool.
yeah,
So
John's my
cool.
buddy, man. He's like my number one. He's like my number one
Oh.
advisor on this book project. But I let him read it. He made a couple of suggestions. He said it's a solid piece. I like it. And he said send it to World War II magazine. Tell them you have my blessings on it. And so I did. And so it took a while, but they came back and said, Karen came back and said, yeah, this is a good piece. I think our readers would find it really interesting. And so that's how that came about. I've had a couple ideas about some other things. I would love to do another article, either for them or for some other magazine. It's the thing is, the book right now is kind of front and center. And with my son doing two different forms of mountain bike racing and racing track, plus, I mean, it's not like I'm retired, I got to get up and go do the day job thing every day. So, yeah, I don't have as much time to work on the book as I wish I had. But I feel like that kind of needs to be my main focus, But yes, to answer your question,
So
I'd love to
why
do
don't you
another
tell us a
article.
little bit about the book
Hell
that
yeah.
you're working on?
So with the old breed is as this is my working copy that I use when I've done practice with voice coaches for voiceover stuff and all. This is my working copy, and it's just beat to hell and back. I had to retape the cover back on it. But that's the one I'm also using, as reference material when I want to double check something as I go through the original manuscript. The book, simply stated, is this. My mother, fall a year ago, which ended up being like right at a year before she passed away, said to me, she said, Henry, there's a lot of unpublished material, or a lot of stuff in your dad's original manuscript that didn't make it into With the Old Breed. And she said, I really wish you or your brother, my brother's written 7 books, but he's not a World War II guy. He's a historian, but his World War II is not his thing. He's like, Henry, you're the World War II guy. You handle that. So, but she said, you need to get your hands on that manuscript, and it was archived at Auburn, but not in a section where any historian could go in. Like when Saul David did Devil Dogs, okay, he went to Auburn and looked at my dad's papers, looked at some letters, and I thought did a fantastic job of all of that. His original manuscript was in what they call closed papers. So the only members of the family could see it. So and that was at our request. When they made the Pacific, Hugh Ambrose wanted to see it. He called me and said, Henry, I really want to see your dad's original manuscript, because anybody's going to know there got to be some nuggets in there that didn't get published. And now I can tell you there's a lot, because I've analyzed the whole thing and I went through 5 highlighters, highlighting all the stuff that didn't get published. Now, a lot of that should have been cut. Okay, I'm not trying to sell anybody that, out of an 820-page manuscript that published out at 312 pages, there's 500 pages of great stuff. I'm not saying that. I would never even imply that. A lot of stuff got cut for brevity and because it needed to be cut. But there are some there's some good material in here that I'm excited by, and I think people who are into World War II history and into the Pacific and just World War II in general would find it interesting. So I'm trying to bring the best unpublished material over into my own manuscript, and then flesh it out with my own narrative of memories of growing up with him as a dad and the conversations we had. Because most of the stuff that made it into With the Old Breed, I mean, I heard all that from his own mouth.
He shared all the time stories when you were growing up.
He did. Yeah. He was not taciturn about that at all. And I keep catching myself wanting to say, look, I've talked about this before, but you and I maybe have not talked about. I mean, I know I've been on here before, but yeah, he shared a lot, and so and even some of the things that didn't get published, I remember him telling me about. But that's the basic concept of the book I want to do, and the I would not call it a definitive, biography of Eugene Sledge, and it's not going to be a unit history of K-35, and it's not going to be a comprehensive history of Peleliu or Okinawa, because those things have already been done by people a lot more eminently qualified to do it than me. But what I can do is add my own context. Like you see his K-bar up there. I mean, I remember walking in his study and seeing that thing on his shelf, and I just pick it up, start looking at it, and he would, I see how well balanced it is, and that kind of thing. And but he never embellished. I mean, he wasn't the kind of guy to do that. It was never. He never told me stories like, I've got this Jap's throat with that K-bar. I mean, he was like, honestly, most of the time he used the damn thing to cut open ration cans.
It's real.
I mean, he would tell it like it was.
I think that's a great idea for a book. I know that we talked about that like a while ago, when you first were thinking about it. But I think it would be a good idea because it's more of like a personal kind of, I guess, not so much behind the scenes, but it's a little bit more personal than With the Old Breed. It shows like a different side than what everybody has read With the Old Breed and seen in the Pacific. So
my brother and I talked about doing an enhanced version of With the Old Breed.
Yeah.
And adding in that stuff, and then we talked about it, and we decided that With the Old Breed is doing just fine like it is. Let's not alter the winning formula, so to speak. Let's not mess with a classic. So then I started thinking about it more. I had a couple of conversations with Richard Frank, and the idea that I came up with was doing my own book, doing my own thing, and just kind of piecing together the unpublished stuff, with my narrative. So it's early in the process. I mean, I'm on page 773 of the original manuscript. And what I mean by that is, the way my process works is I just sit down and I'm transcribing. It's a lot of damn typing, and I'm not a fast typist. But the unpublished stuff that I want to use, I'm just transcribing it over into my own manuscript, and roughing in my story as I go. So, yeah, I mean, I hope it's going to be, I hope one or two people will find it interesting.
Guarantee it's going to be more than one or two people. So you're actually is this the first time you've actually read the full manuscript, or have you read it before?
I read a lot of it when I was a kid. My mom was publishing it. This is the first time I've ever. Yeah. So the book itself, I've read multiple times. The manuscript, this is the first time. I mean, and they sent me a picture. I did not physically see it, although I have many times. The actual legal pads that he wrote on. There's like this big expandable envelope, about, I don't know how to, maybe a foot thick, with those yellow legal pads that he actually wrote the thing in hand. So, but what I had reproduced was what was typed. My mother typed the Peleliu parts, and then, he was a professor at the University of Montevallo, and so he got a grant from the University of Montevallo, and then his secretary typed the Okinawa parts.
That's crazy.
So
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please. But I've talked to McManus about it. He thinks it's a good idea. He likes what he's seen that I've done, which is not a lot. I mean, I haven't sent him much. My manuscript is like 277 pages long so far. A lot of that's going to have to be trimmed back because I can't have this thing be too long, when I get to the end of it. Then I'm going to go back and start crafting it and polishing it and all that. And that's going to take a while.
Super exciting. I think it's a great idea, and I know that so many people are going to, want to read more about Eugene and your dad, and everybody loves With the Old Breed. It will always be. I don't want to say classic because that's not the word I'm looking for, but it's like a legacy book. Like all World War II nerds have read it and they own it, and it's one of those things that is just like awesome.
Well, I mean, I appreciate that. I don't ever, I mean, when I repeat the superlatives about it, I'm repeating what people have said. I happen to agree, but there are a lot of other great memoirs and fine books out there too. And I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of walking the line sometimes. I don't want it to be like I'm always beating the drum about my own father, Like last night on What's the Scuttlebutt, we had George Luz Jr. And George and I become friends. Huh?
Such a nice guy.
Oh yeah, man, I love George. We met at the Band of Brothers thing, when you and Freddie and I first met and all that. And I hung out with him a little bit then, but then he started sending me messages and we started going back and forth, and just a delightful guy. We've had some phone calls, and I said, hey man, I'd love it if you'd come on What's the Scuttlebutt. I know the guys would too. And so yeah, he came up. But so my point earlier, I mean, like talking to him last night, he just the kind of guy that he is, he really like researched my father and was talking a lot about how he'd seen the Pacific and all that. And I kept trying to bring it back to his dad. Because I said, you're our guest. The show tonight is about you, George. And, but it was really cool. Because, I mean, growing up with a World War II veteran father, he and I had a lot of common ground. So it was pretty cool.
I don't think I've ever asked you this question before, but do you have, so a lot of the Band of Brothers, their family, they're like pretty close, like Luz and all those people. Lucy, go away. I know, baby. Are you?
Just get her up in your lap.
She's 88 pounds right now, and I just took her to the vet, and they're like,
wow.
She's way overweight. They're like, she needs to lose 12 pounds. I was like, Yeah, she's not gonna get up on my lap. Do you talk to any of the, family members of people from the Pacific at all? That was my question. No.
Short answer is no. I don't. And that was one thing George and I went into last night. His experience was really cool because he grew up from an early age going to Easy Company reunions. My dad didn't go to any K Company reunions, K35 reunions, until after With the Old Breed came out. So put that about 1981, 82. And then he really started going to a lot of them and reconnecting with a lot of the guys, which he had communicated with some of them, when he was researching the book anyway. I never, so I would have been 15, 16, and then as With the Old Breed began to become more well known and get traction, then I'm in college and so forth. And I was always appreciative of the World War II stuff, but not to the degree that I became later.
No, that makes total sense.
That makes sense. I can't say that I interacted with sons and daughters of K35 guys. I did talk to a lot of the guys themselves when they would call the house looking for my dad. And my father was not the kind of guy who liked to talk on the phone. In fact, he hated to talk on the phone. Because it would always ring when we're at supper, and he's like, "God damn it, the last thing I want to do is talk on the phone," and like my mom would answer, and it's for you, so he'd get up and if it was one of his old K35 guys, man, you'd hear the door close and they were off. They were just off and running, and he would talk for hours. And but yeah, I mean, I got to know a few of those guys, and and that was pretty
Who all
cool.
did you get to know?
I met Snafu. Don ribs me about this. He's like, "Oh yeah, Henry Big Boyd Snafu," which is not true. But when I was a freshman in college, I came home one day. Snafu and his wife had come over from Louisiana to visit my parents, and I came in the living room, and of course I knew who he was, because I'd heard my father talk about Snafu my entire life. And my dad introduced us, and I shook hands with him, and we exchanged pleasantries, and then I was a 19-year-old college kid. I had other things on my mind, and I excused myself and left them to their visiting, and I really wish I'd just sat there and listened. But Bill Layden, just a wonderful guy. Met Bill Layden a couple of times. Again, I have told this to a lot of people before, so some of your listeners may have heard it, but when my dad died, Bill was the first guy that I called. Did not personally meet Stumpy Stanley, but I did talk to him on the phone. And Stumpy, of course, was who Freddie Joe portrayed in Part 9. And I know Freddie's joined in, but he called up on the phone a few times, and and these guys, when they would call, they would never say, "Can I speak to your father?" It was just like when Stumpy Stanley called. And I have told this story before too, but my parents were actually out of town. I think they were in Minneapolis, either doing a documentary that he had been asked to be part of about Peleliu, or maybe at a reunion. Well, no, probably a documentary, because Stumpy would have been at a reunion. But I was outside shooting basketball. I heard the phone ring. I go running inside. I answer the phone, and I hear this deep voice, "Sledgehammer there." And I said, "No, sir. He and my mom are out of town." Said, "Tell him Stumpy called." And I said, "Yes, sir, I will." I said, "All right, thanks." And that was it. And I knew who he was. I knew it was Stumpy Stanley. But, there again, I'm like, man, that he was K Company commander on Okinawa, and after Ack. I mean, and one of my favorite pictures, I had it framed on my wall for a while, but it was a picture of Stumpy sitting in the mud on top of an ammo box, on a radio telephone on Okinawa. And I had that picture framed on my wall. Met R.V. Bergen, actually went out to visit Bergen in Texas in 2006. Not that this guy was not a K Company veteran, but Sid Phillips. Do you know who I'm talking about? You know, he was in the Pacific. Yeah. He was in H-21 with Lecky. Met Sid many times. I mean, God, when I was a kid, I called him Uncle Sid.
So cool. Oh, so what would you like to see happen with the legacy of the old breed? Because I know we've talked about, I know that we've talked about this before, but like how the Pacific just hasn't taken off like Band of Brothers has, because Band of Brothers was like the first of its kind. But what would you like to see for the future of the Pacific and with the old breed and your dad's legacy and K Company's legacy?
I definitely want to see more people watch the Pacific, because I do think they did a fantastic job. And we've talked, I didn't like it at first, but I grew to like it. And, I want more people to see that. I wish they'd show it on History Channel and show it on, whatever the hell they show Band of Brothers. I see Band of Brothers ends up on History Channel quite a bit, but I have
HBO needs to be
and
like here.
I've seen the Pacific on there too.
I didn't know that.
It has been on there. The Pacific, it's just harder to watch. For when we've all talked about that. Bruce McKenna, Kirk Sadusky, he and I've had multiple conversations about this. Bruce told me that had they made the Pacific first and Band of Brothers second, Band of Brothers would have been a much darker, a much darker miniseries. Whereas I love Band of Brothers. God, I've seen it a million times. But the Pacific obviously is where my heart is, but it is harder to watch, but it explores thematically, it gets into some areas that Band of Brothers didn't get into, but I would like to see more exposure for that. I would like, I can't ask for anything on the legacy of with the old breed, because what's happened has just been incredible. I hope people don't ever get tired of it. I hope the Marine Corps doesn't ever decide that, well, we're going to use something else now, So I want to see that continue, I hope I can augment all of that with my own puny effort of a book, but I hope it'll be worthy, because it will have, like, if you appreciate it with the old breed, then there's some cool stuff in here that will be in mine that didn't make the final cut, when with the old breed got published. And I don't know how universal that will, what kind of universal appeal that will have, but like, I'm a music guy. I like a lot of rock and roll and punk rock and stuff like that. AC/DC is one of my favorite bands. Back in Black. One of the best damn albums ever made. The first record I ever bought, was Back in Black, and it's like second best selling album of all time. If you don't want to redo that, right? But imagine if they went into the vaults and found, different cuts or different takes on some of the songs or things. Led Zeppelin's done a lot of that. They've released a lot of like deluxe editions of albums that had, different takes of songs that are very well known. And, now that goes back to, we'll do an enhanced version of your dad's book. Well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to, encroach upon what he did, but I want to augment that, with some stuff that, like the Peleliu landing. There's actually a surprisingly amount of stuff that didn't get published on the Peleliu landing, and so I can use that to be more illustrative of that event. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping it's really gonna be something people.
I definitely think it will. And I mean, this is just my personal opinion, because when I first started getting into World War II, this is how I was. And I feel like it's because my Opa was in World War II, but he was in the European theater. So I learned a lot about the European theater. I didn't learn really much anything about the Pacific. And then I have friends who had, parents or grandparents in the Pacific, and they know so much more about the Pacific. But I also think the Pacific theater is not really talked about as much as the European theater. When people hear World War II, they automatically think of Hitler. They don't think of the Japanese. They automatically think of Hitler.
Yeah.
And so I think getting more of these stories out is super important, and it gets people more into the Pacific. And not saying that the European theater was not dark and violent and whatever, but I mean, being trapped on an island, like, it's a little bit more. I don't want to say more, but it's what am I trying to say? It's a lot darker. It's a lot darker.
It's not as It is. It's not the same thing as a bunch of guys riding through San Mariglis on a tank and then, sitting there and drinking bottles of wine and showing each other Nazi flags and stuff. I mean, it was a totally different experience. And the Japanese were a completely different kind of enemy. I heard somebody basically characterize it like this. The Pacific, you've got Pearl Harbor. You might get Midway in there, Iwo Jima, atomic bomb. That's pretty much in the larger context of the public consciousness or the public conscience. That's the Pacific. That's what they hear. When you look at it from the geopolitical or strategical standpoint, in that context, you land in France and basically push east till you get to Germany. And I say that not to denigrate what happened, because hell, I had an uncle who was a tank commander, my dad's older brother. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. He landed at Veerville. But the Pacific, to fully grasp all of the geographical and strategical context of it, it's vast. And it's harder to wrap your head around. I mean, I struggle with it, and I read about it all the damn time. I learn something new every day, but it's certainly worthy of it. I know my father always felt what you just articulated, that, well, everybody's heard of Europe, everybody's heard of D-Day. The Pacific, it just wasn't that way. And that's absolutely true. Speaking of Peleliu, obviously Peleliu at one time was thought of as a forgotten battle. I know my dad felt that way, and it really bothered him till the end of his life. I would argue that it's not so much a forgotten battle anymore. And that's thanks in part to my father and with the old breed, and thanks in large part to the Pacific. And there's been a lot of scholarship in the last, when I say forgotten battle, that was people in the 80s saying that. In the last 20 years, 30 years, man, there's been a lot of scholarship on Peleliu. I mean, Joseph Whelan just wrote a book. I have not read it yet, Bitter Peleliu. And then of course Dick Kemp, who did Last Man Standing. I've got it right here. Leighton sent it to me. I've got to read it. Didn't have a chance to read it before I was on a podcast with him. That would have been great if I could have done that, but it was okay. I mean, I'm comfortable enough with the subject that, that I could sit there and carry on a conversation, because I knew he focused on the First Marines, as opposed to the 5th and the 7th.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want people to want to continue learning about the Pacific, because it's worthy. God, it's so fascinating when you start really delving into it, and like Ian Toll's trilogy. I mean, I've read 2 volumes of that. I'm gonna read the 3rd volume of that here probably in a couple months.
Somebody said perfect descriptive words of what I was trying to say earlier. Where did it go? Oh wait. Oh, harrowing and violent. The description of the Pacific. Like it was just harrowing. It was eerie. It was, and then somebody did make a really good point. Europe, where was it? Oh, Scott Springs said Europe had a face. Hitler, not so much the Japanese, like in the Pacific. Like you didn't really have a face of the Pacific. You know, there.
Yeah, that I mean that's an interesting way to put it, and you could say that.
There obviously was a face, you know, for the Japanese, but it wasn't as out. You know, you hear the people who scream the loudest always, and that was Hitler. So yeah, so
right,
very interesting. So
well, when you look at the way the Japanese were expanding their empire, encroaching into Manchuria, creating the puppet state Manchukuo, and you know, Richard Frank's book Tower of Skulls, which is the first of what will be his trilogy on the Asian Pacific War. I mean, it starts in 1937. I think it starts in 1937. It may be 1931 because really the Japanese started going into China in 31, but 37 is when the Marco Polo Bridge incident. That's really considered the beginning of their war with China. But you know, for us, the Pacific, like World War II begins with Pearl Harbor. You know, that's when it starts. That is a very American-centric point of view, and I'm not being critical of that because that's what we grew up being taught. But if you are living in China or you are living in Europe or Poland, or, you know, it started way before that.
Built up. They just wanted us. I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words.
Well, they were trying to create their greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, and they saw us as being an obstacle to doing that. And then when we turned off the oil spigot, that was the last straw. It's ironic to me. I've always thought it's so ironic that there were airplanes flying from Japanese carriers attacking Pearl Harbor that had American fuel in their tanks. That had been imported. I mean, you know, I mean, they had that capacity, but not nearly enough. Not nearly enough to keep it going. That's why they had to get us out of the way so they could go on down to Borneo and Java, you know, Dutch East Indies, oil, tin, rubber, all that stuff.
Has Jack started learning about like World War II history? I know he has you, obviously, but has he started learning that in school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have. He has not read With the Old Breed yet. He's really interested in it. And here, that's the thing, man. With a 14-year-old kid, you gotta steer him gently, you know, but you can't push him too hard. And he is very aware of his grandfather's legacy. He's seen the Pacific, not every bit of it. There are parts of it I won't let him watch. He's seen most of it. He does really good imitations, probably even better than I do. So he likes to imitate snafu, you know. Saw you reading last night, writing to me, supposed to write shit down. Thanks, Sledge.
Oh, so good.
You know, that's our favorite scene, but you know, he's very tuned into that, okay? But like I said, they're part like a lot of part 9 I won't let him watch. I obviously grew up reading the manuscript of With the Old Breed, but when the book came out and I got published and it got published, and my dad gave me the copy that I still have over there for my 17th birthday that he autographed for me. You know, I read it. So it was published when I was 15, and then I sat down and read it. Okay, you know, really gave it a proper read through. Andrea and I haven't totally decided when he'll do that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty close to thinking he's ready to do it, you know, but he'll pick up a copy of it and, you know, hey, Daddy, can I look at this? And I'm like, yeah, of course, you know, and he'll read some things, you know, and I just let him do his thing. I don't try to, let me explain to you the Battle of Palalo, son. You know, I just leave him alone. Let him process it, and every now and then I'll ask a question, and he's enjoyed what he's seen of the Pacific. So it's there. You know, I just don't push it too much with him. But I know a lot of his teachers. Actually, his math teacher this year, she was a huge fan of the Pacific. And when she found out Jack Sledge, and he got the are you related to Eugene Sledge? Yes, ma'am, he's my grandfather. So Sarah, gave her a copy of the World War II magazine, because she was just like tripping out on the fact that, the whole connection. And God, I just wish that would help with his grade in accelerated math a little bit better.
Oh, you're struggling. Yeah. Oh, Mrs.
We're working on that.
Here, take this. Hopefully Jack can do better.
Yeah, I did do that, but he's.
Yeah, no, this is one of.
We're working on that.
This is one of my favorite.
He's doing
things.
good and everything.
You signed it for me, so it's on display on my.
Well, I was just
bookshelf.
I know. You're amazing. It honored me that you wanted me to do that.
Yes, I was talking to Layton. I was like, I really want Henry to sign a copy of because before we got to this,
Layton, God, my buddy, and he got me to sign his. I was like, you seriously want me to sign that?
I absolutely
do.
Love Layton. He's such a good dude. But before we were going to the symposium, they don't really sell. Because I live in Oregon, they don't really have a lot of history magazines like in the bookstores and stuff like that. And so I was talking to Layton, and I was like, "Do you have He goes, "Oh, I'm going to pick up a copy of World War II magazine at the airport." And I was like, "They sell military magazines at the airport? Really? What?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, all the time." I go, "Will you pick me up one? Because I'm going to ask Henry to sign it for me, but I'm very nervous to ask him to sign it for me." And he's like, "I'll pick you one up." I was like, "Okay."
Yeah, anybody getting my autograph, if they're going to try to sell that thing, it's not going to get them.
Heck,
won't get them
this
much,
is not getting sold. This is staying on my bookshelf. One of my favorite things.
Well, you were sweet to ask for that, and I definitely want to do more.
I definitely think you.
For sure.
This is a question that is totally for me, and I think I asked it on the last live we did, but I do not remember the answer. Because you were on the episode of Against the Odds on American Heroes channel with your dad.
Yes, American Heroes.
That show is literally my favorite show. I've watched it so many times, but when you came on the screen, I was like, "Oh my God, it's Henry!" I was so excited.
Do you know?
Go
ahead. I'm sorry, because there's something funny I want to tell you.
To be on the show, this is a question just for me because I'm so curious about it.
Yeah, the producer of that show, that maybe even that series, his name is Sammy Jackson. Okay. He called me. This was 2014, I think, and he told me they were going to do a show on Peleliu, and he said, we cannot do this without including your father. And of course, I humbly and profusely thanked him. And he said, would you consider letting us interview for it? And I said, yeah, 100%, of course. And so then he and his team came to my house, not this house. We were living in another house at that time. And that's where they did the interviews. And we can talk more about that if you want to. I'll just tell you this. Do you know that I've never seen that show in its entirety?
Have you seen your episode?
I have not.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe a little of it.
You do need to watch it.
I need to watch it because people refer to it. I actually was over a guy that I work with. I went over to his house one night, and it was actually on, and his wife was watching it, and I was like, "That's the first damn time I've ever seen it."
It is kind of weird to watch yourself though, because I know that I don't rewatch my lives at all. I don't like to hear myself speak. I don't like to watch myself on video. Like I did what I did. I'm gonna leave it there.
I don't listen to I used to listen to our What's the Skull book, but I don't because I can't stand the sound of my own books.
You should do. I honestly think you should do like voiceover and narration. I think you would be absolutely perfect for it.
I'd love to, and I've done some voiceover here in Birmingham. I mean, God, if I could get more work doing that, I would. That's the easiest money I ever made, because I did some commercials for something, and they were just like, okay, the producer was like, okay, read this. Here's your line. Okay, read it like a farm boy in South Alabama. Like, yeah, I think I can handle that. Okay, now read it like a guy who just graduated from law school. I'm like, okay, I can handle that. Okay, now read it like this. And I'm like, well, I have to sound intelligent, so that's going to be a little harder for that. But yeah, I mean, that was the easiest money I ever made, because that just comes naturally to me. But I would love to do that, but there again, how the hell do you find that kind of work? It's hard, you know. But when I took voice lessons at that studio for about a year. It sounds weird to say voice lessons because you picture somebody trying to sing in the opera, but I wanted to learn how to be an effective narrator and how to do effective voiceover. And the book, everything I used every day that I did one of those, I read from With the Old Breed. But back to the Sammy Jackson Against All Odds. I mean, that was. I need to sit down and watch that thing in its entirety. I don't even have it. I don't even have
Discovery Plus, because they are connected with American Heroes channel. But oh my gosh, you need to watch it. It's such a good show. And I really hope they come back for season 3. That'd be really cool. But it went off the air like a while ago, so I'm not 100% sure if they'll come back.
Well, like I said, it came out in 2014. Did my interview sound okay?
Yeah, I thought it was great. We have some questions. I want to apologize for people submitting questions. I kept trying to pop them up and they weren't coming up, but now they're all up. So I'm going to get to everybody's questions now. Ask Henry the questions now. So my apologies that it took a little bit, but good old social media doesn't like to work. So Henry, we have a couple questions. This one is from JD from the History Underground. He wants to know, do you recall your dad and uncle ever discussing their experiences with each other?
That's a really good question. The answer is no, definitely not. My father and my uncle, they were really, really different. So my memories would be, late 1960s on. And my uncle sadly passed away in 84, 85. And he was a war hero in his own right. I mean, 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, 2 Bronze Stars, Silver Star at Vierville, and then at Wallerscheid, Northern Shoulder of the Bulge. He was a Sherman tank platoon commander. Total badass story. But what they may have talked about after the war, I can't really speak to that. I know in my lifetime they did not. But where my father was a talkative individual and willing to share his experiences in a very matter-of-fact way, I don't think that my uncle was so much that way, but they lived in Mobile and we lived here in central Alabama, so there's a little geographical separation there.
What armored division was your uncle in?
741st. He was 741st Tank Battalion. 741st Tank Battalion, which was an independent. They were attached, on D-Day, they were attached to the 1st Infantry Division when they landed at Vierville. Then, very shortly thereafter, they were... Come here, Lulu. Now my dog's coming over here. Come here. At me. No, say hey, Lulu.
Hi, Lulu.
Can you see Lulu? Come here. Come here. Say something smart. Very shortly after D-Day, like I think within the first week or so, then 741st was attached to 2nd Armored Division, or 2nd Division, 2nd Infantry Division. Okay. And they pretty much went through, there was some on and off with that, but they were pretty much attached to 2nd Infantry Division for most of the war. I know they were during the Battle of the Bulge, but
oh wow.
Anyway, I don't want to just keep talking and talking. I want you.
No.
I want to be able to answer
All right,
this
let's
question.
see.
That's important.
World War II tank history. Oh, I'm so happy you joined. After the war, when your father taught in a university, did he ever mention his military service? And did his students know who their teacher was?
Yeah. So go back to the mid to late 70s when he would have been working on with the old breed. Think about what was going on in the early to mid 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
You had Vietnam guys coming home. And so he had a lot of these guys in his classes, and there was, especially for the guys who'd been Marines, but anybody who'd been in combat, anybody who'd been a veteran,
Mm-hmm.
there was commonality there. You know, there was that bond that is forged from a shared experience, that being combat. So, and then in later years, you know, as he got older, I think it was harder for him to communicate with
Mm-hmm.
his students, especially the younger ones, you know, just because he became less and less patient with their lack of preparedness. I can't even imagine what he'd do now. But so there was less of that as he, you know, got older. But by then, with the old breed, because he retired in '91, he
Mm-hmm.
retired 10 years after With the Old Breed was published. So by then, you know, he had a degree of fame, of recognition, you know, not like now, because that was pre Ken Burns' The War, which came out in 2007, and certainly before the Pacific, which was 2010. And, you know, my dad died in '01. But I think his students who took the time to get to know him and talk to him a little bit certainly knew, you know, man, this guy saw some heavy action.
Yeah.
You know? So does that answer the question? I hope it does.
Wants to know, he goes, I know you followed your dad's footsteps on Peleliu. Have you been to Okinawa?
Yeah, man, I want to go to Okinawa. Especially for is Lucy slurping the water?
I know, it's so loud.
I can hear it.
I just had to touch her butt, being like, stop it.
I really, of course, Peleliu was a compelling experience, and that's not what the listener is asking, so I don't want to just go on and on about that. But being of a somewhat virginal, you know, jungle nature with a lot of the rusted artifacts of war lying everywhere, that was a pretty incredible experience. Okinawa is heavily developed. I have gone on Google Earth and looked at, because as I go through, you know, this part, because the part I'm in the original manuscript is Okinawa. They just left Half Moon Hill. They just had the Shuri breakthrough and got down south of Shuri Line. And so I will go on Google Earth, you know, and I'll look up these locations like Half Moon Hill, which, you know, everybody's heard of Sugarloaf Hill because that was over on the west, and that was like one of the anchor points of Shuri, the Shuri Ridge complex. Well, Half Moon Hill was pretty crucial too. 6th Marine Division handled the fight at Sugarloaf Hill. Half Moon Hill was just god awful, horrific. I mean, some of the stuff he describes there is just psychotically disturbing. I mean, because by then he was having hallucinations at night, you know, picturing dead Marines getting up out of their waterlogged foxholes and walk. Yeah. I can't even talk about it without getting choked up. But I would love to go to Okinawa.
That would be.
I'd like to go. Like, I've looked up Half Moon Hill, and it's, you know, there's like a condo sitting there. You know, there's like a little park, you know, because there are lots of little walking parks and memorials and things like that, you know, but Okinawa is a beautiful island, but it's very heavily developed. And Freddie Joe, because he's been there, he spent time there, so I'm sure he could attest to that.
How hard is it to write? This is from World War II Daily. I'm happy he joined too. How hard is it to write about your father's experience as you